This is a PowerPoint on the Grand Tournament, the worst expansion ever. So what I'm going to do is just go through some cards. I'm not doing anything special. I just have to talk about how truly terrible this expansion was. So here are 4 Druid cards. You can look at the rest of the cards from this expansion if you want, but none of them are more interesting than the ones that I've put up here. So let's get through it. When the expansion first came out, Aviana was terrible. Completely unplayable card. Aviana was not playable until Kun the Forgotten King came out. If you don't know what Kun is, it's a 10 mana 7/7. Choose one card that is gain 10 armor or refresh your mana crystals. So, of course, you would play Aviana, Kun, then you would go back to 10 mana, and all your minions would cost 1. It was very, very strong after that card came out, but that was a full year, if I remember correctly, after. So, yeah, that does not help. Then let's move on to Knight of the Wild. So this card actually used to only discount while in your hand, which made it terrible, of course. Caverns of Time did a gigantic swath of buffs to this expansion, along with a couple other really bad ones. So, of course, it now says Beast You Summon this game, which makes it so, it's actually a pretty decent card. You can run this in Beast Druid. It's not amazing, don't get me wrong. I still think it's not great in that deck, but if it had Rush, it would probably be really good, but it doesn't. Then you have Astral Communion. This card is, unbelievably bad. So, yes, it's a 4-mana card to discard your entire hand, which is terrible, to get to 10 mana crystals. See, on paper, that's terrible, and in practice, it's terrible. You can't really use the mana efficiently at all because, well, guess what? You don't have a hand. So Astral Communion just is an unsalvageable effect. You cannot redeem how terrible this effect is. It's just worthless. The only way to make it work was back when Due Process cost 2 mana. You would play Due Process before you played Astral Communion, so you could actually, on curve, play your Astral Communion and still draw cards. But then they nerfed Due Process to 4 mana because of Standard, and, because everyone hates Mill, Druid, and Wild. So Astral Communion is just completely unplayable again. Then, lastly, you have Savage Combatant. Almost every single class, if I remember correctly, got an Inspire card. Maybe every class did, but I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm just going to go over, some of the more interesting ones. Savage Combatant was actually really good when it first came out. It's just, in today's game, it's way too slow. Maybe if it were 2 mana, it would be a really good card again, but it's just really bad. I don't know what more to say. I'm going to be honest. When you look at the Druid cards, they're just really uninteresting. The only other thing that might have been anything was, Living Roots, which has been a pretty good token-generating card for Druid for a long time, but it's not that interesting. And then Darnassus Aspirant, but do you really want me to say, okay, this card was kind of okay and then just sucks now? That's where it would be if I had talked about that card. Then we have Hunter. So Hunter is interesting because Hunter is the only class in all of TGT to have 10 cards and 2 legendaries. I don't know why. The reasoning specifically is because it is Dreadscale and Acid Maw. They are, tied together, but I don't really know why they did that, but let's get into it. Dreadscale, although it was worse before it was buffed in Caverns of Time, it used to hit your minions as well, and not the enemy hero. It was still actually pretty good once Serpent Bloom was printed. Of course, if you don't know, Serpent Bloom is a 0-mana spell that gives a beast poisonous, so Dreadscale, would kill all your opponent's minions. Yeah, it would hurt a lot to kill your own minions, but it was still worth running sometimes. After the Caverns of Time buff, though, Dreadscale is just still the best, one of, if not the best card in Hunter, in my opinion. It's just so good. Being able to kill your opponent's board for 3 mana, regardless of health, regardless of anything, regardless of elusive, things like that, is just so nice. You can tutor Dreadscale very efficiently. You can get copies of it. It's just one of my favorite cards ever. Then you have Acid Maw. So Acid Maw has one of the largest buffs ever in Hearthstone. It went from 7 mana to 3 mana. Everything else was about to stay the same. You heard me right. It was 7 mana and a 4/2. With the same text. Yeah. Acid Maw became significantly better after it was buffed, obviously. And when you still had Trial of the Jormungandr, it was actually a really good card, because you could summon Acid Maw and Dreadscale from your deck for 5 mana. It's actually pretty good at that point. Then they nerfed Trial of the Jormungandr to 6 mana, and wow, suddenly Acid Maw is just not that great anymore. People still try to make this card work all the time. I could not tell you why. It's not very good in Beast Hunter. It's okay at best in that deck. Beast Hunter still sucks, but that's different. It's mediocre in things like Reno Hunter, even though people still try to make it work all the time. Again, not really too sure why. And then you can play it in like a small spell hunter that either tries to use Aerosmith or Kolkar Pack Runner, and it's actually pretty good in that scenario. One thing to note is Acid Maw used to be absurdly broken. Right after it was buffed in Caverns of Time, even Shaman, when even Shaman had like literally 300,000 bots being played at one point, I wish I was joking, there used to be so many bots in Wild and even Shaman bots that Acid Maw wasn't recognized by the bots. I don't know why it was an oversight, especially because Acid Maw was so popular because of Caverns of Time and the buff, but the bot coders did not make it so the bots would ever target Acid Maw, ever. Intentionally, they would never do it. So what happened was you would be able to play Acid Maw just on curve, and then you would literally never lose to even Shaman because Acid Maw would just always be on board, and their board would always get cleared by anything you could possibly do. I would say if that were still the case, if Acid Maw just could never be targeted, it would probably be really broken, but obviously that was just a bad interaction to a bot. Then you have Ball Spiders. Again, one of the most egregiously priced cards ever. It had the exact same text for 3 mana. You would summon 3 1/1 beasts with Death Rattle to get random beasts for 6 mana. Of course, it was buffed to 3 mana, and then it was actually pretty good. You could use it in Twist with Undertaker as 3 ticks for your Undertaker, which is actually very significant. It's ran in Standard, if I remember correctly, for like token lists. It's not bad at 3 mana. It's not great, don't get me wrong. The web spinners are just pretty bad, and their Death Rattle is not worth it. But overall, it's genuinely not that bad of a card. Then you have King's Elec. So let's get this straight. The other 3 cards were pretty bad for a long time in Hearthstone. King's Elec, though, is actually pretty good. I know, surprising, right? That, something called the worst expansion ever has a handful of good cards. Whoever could have guessed. But yeah, King's Elec actually was very good. It was the best draw card in Hunter for a long, long time. Obviously, as time goes on, a card like this just gets significantly worse because, well, every deck should be running more expensive minions than Hunter, for the most part. Like, either they're going to be, giants, or they're going to be, like 8 or 9 drops, like your Shutterwalk, things like that. So it's just impossible to make use of this card. And, as you can read there, reveal a minion in each deck. That is Jousting. Jousting is a mechanic that was, for TGT, and it was terrible. It was abysmally bad. They all read the same thing. Reveal a minion in your deck. If yours costs more, do blank. King's Elec, draw it. You had things like Argent Lance, I think, would gain like +1 durability or something. And then like Tuskar, like Knight or something. I don't know. It would heal your hero for 7 and Paladin. And those cards are absolutely terrible. Yeah, like, this expansion is just so unbelievably bad. Let's move on because, yeah. Then you have Mage. Ronin is just terrible. I mean, it's 8 mana for a 7/7. It's already understated for such a high cost. Even back in the day, this is like a terrible card. It's Death Rattle, so it has a super delayed effect, so that means you sometimes don't even get its Death Rattle. And then it gives you 3 1-mana spells. So all in all, it is 11 mana to use it to its maximum efficiency for a 7/7 that is delayed in its effect. What were they thinking printing this card? Genuinely. Fallen Hero. Fallen Hero is actually not terrible. It was pretty bad for a long time, don't get me wrong, but nowadays it's pretty okay in Even Mage. You can make it work since you kind of need sources of extra damage in Even Mage. Fallen Hero, of course, does that. That's more than you can say for almost any other card in this expansion to say, oh, it has an actual use case. Yeah, there's not much more to say. Koldara Drake is actually one of the few cards in the game that has an infinite damage combo. So you can play Reno Lone Ranger and get the Arcane Bullet, which refreshes your mana, it refreshes 2 mana. So if you play it with Koldara Drake, you can do infinite damage as long as you have the APM and yada yada. The issue is it's terrible. It's 18 mana across minimum of 2 turns, and it's a 1 in 7 chance to happen because you need to roll Arcane Bullet, which, of course, there's 7 bullets. It's not good. It's really bad, even. It used to be, kind of okay. You could have actually made it work, when Reno Lone Ranger costs 8 mana and not 10. But now that Reno costs 10, it's just, like, not even funny anymore because it's so bad. It's something all right. Koldara Drake is a card of all time, I'll tell you that. Then, lastly, you have Flame Lance. Again, Flame Lance, of course, was buffed in Caverns of Time. It went from 5 mana, deal 8 damage to a minion, to 5 mana, deal 25 damage to a minion. This is the single largest number change on any card ever. A positive of 17. Nothing has ever had a number change higher than that ever in this game. Then let's get to Paladin. Edric the Pure is so unbelievably bad that I am just confused why it was printed. Even for, again, 2015 Hearthstone, even for the Grand Tournament, Edric the Pure is genuinely a worthless waste of, pixels in our video game. Enter the Colosseum actually used to be 6 mana, and it was just a direct downgrade to Brawl at the time. Brawl is still, kind of not that great nowadays, but let that sink in, though. Brawl was amazing when the game first came out. It was great for probably, 7 or 8 years of Hearthstone's history. Nowadays, yeah, it's not that great, but that's fine. For a classic card to last for, 8 years being a really good card. So when you look at Enter the Colosseum, which is a direct downgrade to Brawl at 6 mana, that says a lot. Now that it's 3 mana, though, it's actually significantly stronger. You'll play this against aggro decks, destroy everything except usually, a 3-attack minion on average. And that's huge to be able to destroy an entire board of minions and leave up only one, and it has, not that high of an attack. It's very useful. It's actually really useful against Miracle Rogue for the opposite reason. Yes, you'll be leaving up an 8/8, but you're also destroying, 3 8/8s and a couple of, 3/5s. So that's, really good. Especially because, it's 3 mana, you can work around it a lot more efficiently, things like that. Then, lastly, I chose Warhorse Trainer to talk about. Warhorse Trainer used to be a 3 mana 2/4 that only gave +1 attack and not taunt. It was actually buffed twice. It was buffed to give +2 attack and taunt, and then buffed to be a 3/4 from a 2/4, due to being in core. The thing is about Warhorse Trainer is that it's never been good outside of Odd Paladin. Ever. Which says a lot, because on paper, this is a really disgusting card. 3 mana, 3/4, it has a great body to give, it effectively says give all your other minions +2 attack and taunt. Because, if you're trying to play a deck that makes Warhorse Trainer work, you're running cards that summon a lot of Silverhand Recruits. But outside of Odd Paladin, it's just never been able to work. Silverhand Recruit decks are pretty terrible outside of Odd Paladin to say as well. There used to be a Dude Paladin that you could play in, I think it was, Knights of the Frozen Throne, or maybe, Kobolds and Catacombs, one of those. I can't remember correctly, or I can't remember off the top of my head, but that says a lot that, it's only been playable as a standalone deck outside of Odd Paladin once have Silverhand Recruits made sense. There have been cards that are good that use Silverhand Recruits, or something like Even Paladin, which, hero powers, but those cards are just standalone good cards. They're not, dedicated, Silverhand Recruit decks. So Warhorse Trainer just has never had the opportunity to be a playable card. Then we get to Priest. Confessor Paletrist is just unbelievably terrible. It used to be a 7 mana 5/4 without Battle Cry. So it's still, again, abysmally understated for a not very good effect because, it's Inspire, so you'd have to spend 2 mana to get it to work, and it didn't have the Battle Cry until Caverns of Time. I just cannot understand why these cards were printed. I cannot fathom what was going through Blizzard's head, even for 2015 Hearthstone, why they would print cards like this. I don't get it. It's fine, though, because then we get to talk about an actually good card in Convert. Convert used to be 2 mana with the exact same effect, but it didn't have the it costs 1 line. So they technically nerfed it to 3 mana. However, the it costs 1 line is significant. Now you can steal your opponents big minions, things like that, and with Convert, and play them in the same turn, and get a lot of value. Convert is ran in ETC and Reno Priest lists very, very often, because it's just useful. You can steal things like Grumble from Shudderwock, or Shudderwock itself. You can steal things in the mirror to be able to, with your ETC, to be able to, get your Razas if you need them and you don't have them. It's just actually a very good card. Spawn of Shadows is probably one of, if not the best card from TGT. I think you could make the argument that it is the best card from TGT. I think there is a world that you could have made that argument. For a long time, the thing about this card is it just does so much goddamn damage. It used to be a 5/4 without Battle Cry, but it had the same effect as Inspire. But since your hero power would cost 0 because of Raza, you would just play this, and then because of Anduin, and now new Raza, you would just spam your hero power and then deal a lot of damage to your opponent. You would effectively be doing 2 damage to them more than you were dealing to yourself because you would ping their face, and that's really useful. Spawn of Shadows is actually just like super strong. There are games where I will just like kill my opponent on turn 5 because I'll have, say, Papercraft Angel up, and then I'll play Spawn of Shadows on turn 5, and then boom, my opponent just took like 10 damage from hand, not including anything else that they had on board, and that's nothing to scoff at all. You can genuinely do a lot of gross things with this card. It's actually very strong, and of course, Conference Time gave it Battle Cry, really, really good. Then, lastly, we have Confuse. On paper, this might seem like kind of not that great of a card, just swap the attack and health of all minions, right? But because of Astral Automaton, which is, the 1-mana 1/2 that reads, has +1/+1 for each Astral Automaton, each other Astral Automaton you summon this game, that is an aura effect. So, what happens is you play Confuse, and then they will keep the +1/+1 from the aura effect, and then their stats will be swapped, so their health and attack will be swapped, and then they will get a double helping of their, passive ability, their aura effect. So if you have like a 10/11 Astral Automaton, it will then go to a 20/19, I think is the math. I don't remember. It's something like that. 20/19 Astral Automaton from playing Confuse. This also works with Topsy-Turvy. However, Confuse is all of your minions. So if you have a board of like, 5, 6-ish Astral Automatons, and then you play Confuse, your opponent's just going to get fucking killed from this card. It is genuinely very strong in that effect. Is it overall that great of a card? No, but in that deck, it's really good. Then we have Rogue. So, Anubarak is something alright. Rogue. Rogue is really interesting to talk about because, it's bad. So, Anubarak used to be I think it was Death Rattle, summon a 4/4 Nerubian, and then you would return Anubarak to your hand. So, you would play an 8-mana 8/4 that did nothing, and then if it died, you would get it back, and it would just leave a 4/4. Oh boy! Yeah, it's just terrible. It's actually, significantly better with this newer version of Anubarak. Summon a 4/4 Nerubian that summons another Anubarak. That's actually, not bad if you can cheat Anubarak out, which Rogue can sometimes do. It's really fun to play around with if you are playing, one of these decks that can make Anubarak work, like if you're using a licensed Apothecary for Anubarak. It's actually really fun. Is it good? Obviously not, but I played that deck, a licensed Apothecary Anubarak deck a lot. It's actually really, really fun. I do recommend it if you guys want to play something like that, make a deck like that yourself. Will you win a single game? Probably not. Should you craft a Anubarak? Definitely not, but it's really fun. Again, I keep saying this whenever we get to a new legendary that's terrible, that it's one of the worst legendaries ever printed. Of course, I mean for the class, because obviously, but it's just unbelievably terrible. Then you have Buccaneer. Buccaneer is actually one of the best 1-drops ever in Hearthstone's history. It's just unbelievably strong. It's like the cornerstone of every single Odd Rogue or Pirate Rogue for a long time. Basically until, Sunken City, you could say. Or potentially until Whizbang's Workshop. People were still running Buccaneer. Obviously, after Whizbangs, there's literally no point to ever run Buccaneer because of Treasure Distributor. And, Treasure Distributor is just absurd. But yeah, Buccaneer is just really useful. You could run it in Kingsbane Pirate Rogue. You could run it in just Odd Rogue. You run it in regular Pirate Rogue. All these different decks. And it's just good. Giving your weapon +1 attack is a lot of damage. If your weapon has, 2 or 3 durability, that would still be 2 or 3 damage from a 1-drop, which, at the time is pretty unprecedented for a 1-drop to be able to deal 2 or 3 damage. So, and, be a good card. So that does say a lot. Then you have Poison Blade. Again, Poison Blade was one of the worst cards ever printed for a long time. It used to be a 4-mana 1/4 weapon with the exact same text. Unbelievably bad. Genuinely so terrible. It was, of course, buffed in Captain's Time, like a lot of other cards, to be 2-mana 1/3, and it's still really bad. It is significantly better, though. You can play even Rogue and try and make it work. Obviously, I've done it. I've played at least half a dozen games of every single class with, after Sing Along Buddy came out, stuff like that, trying to make things work. I was actually the one that figured out that Sing Along Buddy didn't work with Poison Blade unintentionally, because the way that it's worded, it should have worked, but there was an unintentional bug with Poison Blade where Sing Along Buddy didn't trigger it. No one ever would have figured out that bug if it weren't for me, so that's nice. But yeah, Poison Blade, just truly terrible. Maybe, genuinely, if this card gave +2 attack, it would actually be quite good, if you ask me. Like, when I was playing Even Rogue, it really felt like I was able to just, accelerate this and press the button a lot. The issue is that getting 1 damage for, how much mana you're spending was nothing. That, I'm saying, though, if it was 2 attack, it would actually be a genuinely very strong card. Lastly, we have Burgle. Burgle used to give you 2 cards, now it gives you 3 after it was buffed. Counter's time, of course, blah, blah, blah. And Burgle is actually the namesake of Thief Rogues in Hearthstone, Burgle Rogue. The issue is Burgle has always been terrible. It's always been a bad card. So, that's really funny, right? That the first card to ever, introduce this mechanic has always been bad, but people still talk about it. Then you have Shaman. Shaman is something alright. You got the Mistcaller, which is, again, one of the worst legendary minions ever printed. And it was power crept by a 2-drop, Prince Kaliseth. Yes, Kaliseth didn't give it to minions in her hand, but, who cared? Giving +1/+1 to all minions in your deck for 2 mana at not much of a cost at the time, not playing 2 mana cards, was really, really good. Kaliseth is one of the best cards we've ever had. Not anymore, of course, because you need to run 2 mana cards, but that's the thing. Mistcaller is just unfathomably terrible. Everything about this card is terrible. It's understated. It's incredibly expensive. It does nothing useful. It doesn't do anything on the board. It's just truly a terrible card. It's also been power crept by Hope of Quel'Thalas in a gigantic way. Hope of Quel'Thalas is, of course, a 6-mana 4/2 weapon that gives minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield +1/+1. So it does that twice, so it's more than Mistcaller. It's a weapon, so it's better, because it also deals phase damage, and it gives it to minions on board. What is this card, man? What were they thinking? Then we have Tuskar Totemic. So Tuskar Totemic used to be 3 mana before Caverns of Time, of course, but it also used to summon any totem. You heard me, any totem. So you could summon things like Mana Tide Totem to draw more cards, Flame Tongue Totem to give adjacent minions +2 attack, or of course, Totem Golem, which, of course, Totem Golem is a 2 mana 3/4 totem that with Overload 1. Totem Golem was just really, really, really strong in basically every single aggro shaman for forever, for a long time, right? You would use it with things like Tunnel Trog, which came out in League of Explorers as a curve play to give your Tunnel Trog a lot of attack and just be a very strong minion. You used to run it in Even Shaman because, well, it was a totem, so it would get buffed, and it was a lot of stats for 2 mana. Of course, nowadays, you don't run it at all because why would you? There's just better cards. But yeah, Totem Golem, really strong card. Tuskar Totemic, you used to be able to summon it. Going back to Tuskar Totemic, it was then nerfed to summon a random totem, and it was really bad for a long time because it was 3 mana to summon a random totem. But when it was buffed to 2 mana in Caverns of Time, it actually started to see play in Even Shaman. It's been phased out, though, because there have just been better cards printed since that point, but it was pretty good for a little while in Even Shaman. Okay, so Elemental Destruction was buffed. It used to overload you for 5, and then it was buffed to overload for 2. And it's okay as a removal card in that sense. However, it's not a good card. It actually was a better card when used with Overdraft in the past because you could run it with the quest in Shaman, the quest line in Shaman, to, have fun. It was just a better card as a fun combo piece than it is as a removal card. Is it a fine removal card? Yeah. Do you ever hard run it? Almost no decks do. So its main niche use effect was just to give you a lot of overload. You would play it past Brucon of the Elements to get 10 overload, play 2 copies to get 20, and then you would play Overdraft to deal 20 damage. Of course, you would play more overload cards, so you'd kill your opponent with that overdraft, yada yada. But that high score, quest line Shaman, Dane did a lot of videos on it, was okay. It was it was mainly just quest line Shaman and you would just play it more like for the high score, but it was at least a niche use case that was very fun, more so than just, okay, well, this is kind of a bad removal card, and it's still kind of just a bad removal card. Then we have Warlock. So I know I did 4 cards to the other classes, right? But that's because the other classes really didn't have enough cards to talk about that were, like, interesting, or at least, like, so bad that you had to talk about them. Warlock has cards that are so bad you have to talk about them, but they do have, cards that were really good. Wilfred Frizzlebang is so bad. Even for 2015 era, playing a 6-mana 4/4, then having to tap, which is another 2 mana, so 8 mana 4/4, just to make your next card, your card from your tap cost 0. Horrible. Unbelievably bad. Because your deck is full of a bunch of terrible cards because it's 2015 Hearthstone, so there's nothing that actually matters to discount. You couldn't order your deck like you could with Polk Out, which you can do now, but obviously, why would you? Because Wilfred's terrible. So you're just stuck in this scenario where, okay, if you could somehow get Wilfred out on like turn 5 with the coin, you could maybe tap on turn 6 and maybe hit something that matters costing 0. That's a lot of steps for basically nothing. Wilfred Fizzlebang, truly a horrendous card. I think this card could actually cost 3 mana and still be not that good. But then you have Void Crusher. Holy shit, this card, dude. 6 mana 5/4 demon, inspire, destroy a random minion for each player. So you would again spend 8 fucking mana to then destroy a random enemy minion, which is terrible for 8 mana, and then have the chance of destroying your own Void Crusher, or guaranteed if it was your only minion on board. So 8 mana to draw a card, take 2 damage, and destroy an enemy minion. Would that card ever, in any history of Hearthstone, see play? Obviously the fuck not. So Void Crusher is just unfathomably terrible. I can't get over how horrible these cards are. But it's fine. Let's talk about actually a good card in Fist of Draxus. Fist of Draxus has been one of the best discard Warlock cards ever. And I mean ever. Like, this card is so strong that at certain points in discard Warlock, you would run Grave Defiler, which is a 1 mana 2/1 with Battle Cry, copy a Fel spell in your hand, just to copy Fists of Draxus. Of course, at the time, it was because of Cataclysm and Soul Barrage mainly, but, copying Fist of Draxus was still really good. Fist of Draxus is just great. There's no reason to play a discard Warlock not running this card. I think that might be true again for another few years. If you ever want to play discard Warlock, you still probably need Fist of Draxus. Eventually, this card will get outpaced. They're eventually going to print another card that's going to be better. Don't get me wrong. It's always happening. It will always happen. Especially for a card that's, 9 years old and isn't, like, super flashy, doesn't have, it doesn't really have that many broken things about it, because it's, hits a random enemy. It's only 4 damage, which, even for today's game, is still, like, not very much, even if you are playing it for free a lot of the time. So, eventually, they're going to print a card that just will be better, and you know what? It happens. Then you have Dreadsteed. Dreadsteed's actually really, really cool. So Dreadsteed used to summon a copy just instantly, right after it died. And it was mediocre, wasn't actually that good, but people liked the card because, well, it's just cool. You can use it for a lot of different effects. You can use it with your Mortal Coils. You can use it to just bump minions, stuff like that. It was nerfed in Knights of the Frozen Throne because of Defile, though. Defile, if you don't know, somehow, is, of course, 2 mana spell, deal 1 damage to all minions. If any die, repeat. So Dreadsteed, instantly summoning itself, would just make Defile infinitely clear boards. Not infinitely, because the max integer is like either 30 or 60 on most Hearthstone cards. So, effectively, if you had something that has like 31 health, usually it'll live, but whatever. But yeah, it's just an iconic card. It's not good in any way, shape, or form, but people really love it. Then you have Tiny Knight of Evil. So this card was buffed to give +2/+2 in Caverns of Time. And, at the same time, Dark Bargain was buffed from 6 mana to 3 mana to destroy 2 random minions and discard 2 cards. So, what would happen a lot is you would just coin Tiny Knight, play Dark Bargain. If your opponent couldn't remove one or both of the Tiny Knights, you would destroy their minions, give both of them +4/+4, and you'd lose the game. Obviously, they nerfed this. They made it so it gave +2/+1, and then Dark Bargain costs 4, so you can't, like, tempo it as efficiently, but it was one of the most disgusting and overpowered times in Hearthstone's history. I don't know why they did it. I don't know why they left it that way for so long. They left it that way for over a month, but it is what it is. Of course, these cards were, used with Chamber of the Vasidius, but we're not going to talk about that card. That card's not from TGT. For Warrior, I just have to... I can't even pick 4 cards that are interesting to talk about from Warrior, because these cards are horrible. Aside from cards that have been buffed, like Bash, Alexstrasza's Champion is the only card here that has seen any play. On paper, that makes sense, though. Alexstrasza's Champion, on paper, is just really a good card. 2 mana, 3/3 with charge. That makes a lot of sense. But Bash used to be 3 mana and was terrible. It was buffed to 2 mana in the core set, and then it was suddenly a good card. Bolster, absolutely terrible card. Sparring Partner, absolutely terrible card. King's Defender. There used to be a running gag for a long time that King's Defender was just strictly worse than Fiery War Axe, because the durability didn't matter, because why were you playing Taunt Minions? Because Taunt Minions in Hearthstone used to be really bad. Like, really bad. You used to never want to run Taunt Minions. But, of course, when Fiery War Axe was nerfed, King's Defender was, technically a direct upgrade. Then you have Orgrimmar Aspirant. What the fuck is this? +1. It's like Buccaneer, but significantly worse, because it costs 2 more mana, and it costs 2 more mana because you have the hero power to make it work. So it's 5 mana total to do what Buccaneer did. Yeah. Magnetor Alpha, all these cards, cards that say also damages the minions next to whomever he attacks, or things like that, have always been bad until you had Stonebound Gargan and Hollowhound. Those are the first cards like that have actually been good, and those were printed in the last, 2 years. So, as you can imagine, a 4 mana 5/3 that basically has no text because it's going to die, your opponent would just kill it. Yeah. Then we get the Sea Reaver. Sea Reaver might genuinely be the worst card ever printed. Not an exaggeration this time. It might actually be the worst card ever. It is it's a Boulder Fist Ogre with a downside, because you only deal damage to your minions. Yes, the idea is you can set up your board, and then you draw Sea Reaver, and then it'll trigger all your Enrage effects, but same thing as Flame Leviathan in Goblins vs. Gnomes, you can't make this card work consistently, no matter what you do, especially because, there's... I think literally up until this expansion, there was no way for Warrior to tutor this card at all. There was literally no way. Now with All You Can Eat, you can technically tutor it, but again, why? Why would you? It's unbelievably bad. It might genuinely be the worst card ever printed, if you ask me. Then lastly, we have Varian Wrynn. 10 mana 7/7, understated. Draw 3 cards. Put any minions you drew directly into the battlefield. So, you basically would run Big Warrior with this card, except, the fact that big minions were dog shit bad at this point in Hearthstone, as we could, see from every big minion we've ever seen. Horrifically bad. So there was literally nothing to make this card work, and even nowadays, maybe, if Warrior had access to Order in the Court, Varian Wrynn could be playable. Genuinely speaking, if the Order in the Court was in Warrior, Varian Wrynn could be an okay card. It's not, though. So... yeah. Varian Wrynn, just unbelievably bad. Every single one of these cards, except for Bash and Alexstrasza's Champion, is just truly terrible. Bolster is, not even, remotely good in Taunt Warrior, which says a lot, because you have a deck called Taunt Warrior, where you could run 2 mana, give your minions +2/+2, and it's still a bad card. Then we get to neutral cards. I was going to do, a whole, write-up about, all these different neutral cards, stuff like this. These are the only 5 neutral cards that at all matter to be talked about during, from TGT. You could say Ice Howl is at least funny, but Ice Howl is just, unbelievably bad. It's a 9 mana 10/10 with Rush. Except it's not Rush, it's Charge, but it can't attack heroes. Ever. Okay, anyway, let's get back to these cards. Justicar Trueheart. Justicar Trueheart actually used to be really good in Warrior. It used to be 6 mana at the time, blah, 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 but you get tank up instead of armor up. So you would go from, gaining 2 armor to gaining 4 armor whenever you hero power. Insane for the time for control warriors that would just go to fatigue every single game and not really win the game. Obviously nowadays, Justicar Trueheart, even in the core set, is just unbelievably bad and slow. I just don't know why they've put it in the core set. I'm going to be honest, why they even bothered buffing it, but whatever. Let's move on. Let's go to the opposite side, to Bolf Ramshield. So Bolf is, again, unbelievably bad, terrible card, blah, 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 except for when the Jailer was printed. The Jailer, of course, is a 10 mana 10/10 that has Battle Cry, destroy your deck. For the rest of the game, your minions are immune. So for a while, you would be able to play Bolf plus Jailer, and then, because of that, you would just play, it was mainly in Druid. So as long as your opponent didn't run things that would just destroy minions, just like, say, destroy all enemy minions, like, say, a Twisting Nether, you could not take damage for the rest of the game. Was that good? No, actually, it was pretty bad, because your opponent would almost always run ways to destroy your Bolf and your Jailer and things like that. Aside from, like, aggro decks, maybe. And some aggro decks still even run removal. Zephyrus could destroy Bolf because of Shadow Word Pain, things like that. So, yeah, Bolf was just, like, never sticking into decks that actually would benefit from this, but it's fine. And then the Jailer was nerfed to only target itself with immune, and, well, guess what? Bolf sucked because of it. There's actually a iconic Hearthstone video before, before, like, pity timers and before Legendary Protection, that's what it's called. Before Legendary Protection, where I don't remember who it was, but it was some guy got, like, 5 Bolfs in a row as his legendaries. So he only got pulled Bolf for 5 in a row. Remember, this is the Grand Tournament, an expansion that has unbelievably terrible legendaries. So to be opening packs at that time without protection so you could get the same legendary again, holy shit, dude. Holy actual fuck. It's fine. Let's move up to Adist Darkbane. Adist Darkbane is actually a pretty good card. You run it in things like, I lost my train of thought. Like Libram Paladins to be able to buff it, to deal damage. Its main use case, though, was with Thaddeus, the 10 mana Thaddeus. Oh gosh, I don't remember what it's called. Where when you would get the odd polarity with after its first nerf, so you could play Thaddeus, then Adist Darkbane, and then Holy Mackie roll for effectively infinite damage. Of course, it was APM based, but since Adist Darkbane would cost 0 because of Thaddeus, and then your Holy Mackie roll would cost 0 because of Thaddeus. If you don't know, Holy Mackie roll is 1 mana spell, heal a target for 2, and then it repeats. And then, of course, Thaddeus, 10 mana, 11/11. At the time, it was your odd cost cards cost 4 less, swap on even turns or whatever. For your even cards cost 4 less. I don't know how to read. I don't know the exact test off the top of my head. I'm sorry. But so, of course, you would just be able to play Thaddeus, Adis, and then Holy Mackie roll, spam as much as you possibly could, and then kill your opponent. It was okay. It was actually pretty decent. It wasn't great, but Paladin doesn't really have that many good win conditions, so it's kind of the best you had access to. Obviously, Thaddeus got nerfed to do 2 instead of 4, so yeah, Adis is not playable anymore. And then we move back over to Skycap and Crag. Crag was a meme legendary for a long time. You can never actually run enough pirates to make Crag work. Whenever there would be a new expansion where pirates were added, people would always test Crag and come to the same conclusion. You can't really run enough, you don't have enough ways to generate like a wide board of pirates to make Crag work. It's, really expensive, so if you draw it early, you're just kind of fucked, things like that, right? But with the printing of Perils in Paradise and Pirate Demon Hunter, Crag is actually a very strong card. A lot of people don't like to run Crags. They like to run Orana so they can run the Priest Pirate, which is not worth it in any way, shape, or form, because Crag is just significantly better. Crag, of course, is ultra synergistic with your Sigil of Skydiving, again, which is a card I've said is like one of, if not the best cards in Wild for the expansion. But it's absurd. You can summon 3 pirates with charge that your opponent cannot deal with because they summon on your turn. At the start of your turn, because, it's a sigil. And Dangerous Cliffside is the location, which, of course, once you proc it, you summon 2 1/1s with charge. After your attacks, you can do it again. You can refresh the location. So what happens is you can get Crag down on like turn 3 very consistently. Very consistently. If your turn 1 is like play, Treasure Distributor, Brigand Patches, your turn 2 is then Signal Skydiving, you can then play Crag for 1 mana on turn 3. A 4/6 with charge for 1 mana. Actually very good and significant. But you can also do it in Shaman, in Pirate Shaman, and I think it's a little worse in that deck, I will say, because you don't have as much card draw. So, a card like Crag is a little worse, but whatever. Then lastly, the card that's been in the middle, staring at you, is the Wicked fucking Skeleton, the Skeleton Knight. 6 mana, 7/4 undead, Death Rattle, reveal a minion in each deck. That's the Joust mechanic that we talked about before. If yours costs more, return this to your hand. 6 mana, 7/4. Return this to your hand as its Death Rattle, only if you have the higher cost card. It's infinite value, you might think. And that's, of course, what they're going for, but who the fuck wants to play a 6 mana 7/4? And who the fuck wants to spend 6 more mana for a 7/4? Again, and again, and again. It's just unbelievably terrible, this card. Truly, truly one of the worst cards ever printed. I don't know. But yeah, that's going to be it from me. If you enjoy, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This is a wildly different type of PowerPoint than I usually do. I just wanted to say fuck it, talk about some cards that I don't like, talk about some cards I do like, talk about some cards that are good, talk about some cards that are bad, just because I want to talk about cards. I don't want to have to do all this, have to think about, what the theme is, all this stuff. I just want to talk about a really bad expansion and why it's really bad. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Shadows are rising again!
Darker than they've ever been. As evil descends from the skies, the world cries out, how will we survive? Out of the hall of explorers, and up from the dusty tomb. They grab their whips and fedoras, these legends are the